Understanding behavioral biases is crucial for making sound financial decisions. Behavioral finance integrates psychology with economics, illustrating how cognitive biases and emotional reactions often lead us away from rational, optimal financial behaviors. For example, loss aversion makes the fear of loss more intense than the joy of gain, causing investors to avoid realizing losses on underperforming investments. Confirmation bias prompts individuals to favor information that confirms their existing beliefs, ignoring contrary evidence. Anchoring bias shows when people rely excessively on initial information, affecting future financial judgments. Overconfidence in one's financial acumen can lead to unnecessary risks and significant losses. Similarly, herd behavior drives individuals to make investment decisions based on popular sentiment rather than solid financial analysis. By acknowledging these biases, individuals and financial managers can develop strategies to counteract their effects, enabling more informed, rational financial choices that align with long-term objectives. So I want to ask everybody, and maybe we can start with Mary, how do we recognize herd behavior, and what can individuals do to make more independent and hopefully wiser financial decisions?
Yeah, and actually, let me even back up and talk a little bit about biases, because I think that's an important foundational principle, understanding everything. One of the things that I think is really important to know is there's hundreds of biases, and it's great to be aware of it and know what they are. But I don't think our goal in this is to be able to memorize all the biases and be able to regurgitate it. We really want to see how biases affect behavior and how they affect our behavior as well as our clients' behavior. So if you're on the financial planning side, it's understand you have biases as well. I've heard way too many times people say, "Oh, that's for the other person," right? Everyone else have biases, not myself. And so it's really important to understand, oh, we all have these commonalities. It's called being human. And as we are human, we have a tendency to make certain, maybe irrational or rational decisions along the way. And so I think that's a very important concept to understand, is that our goal is not to eliminate all biases, because that would be eliminating the human side of us. The goal is really to understand how these biases affect both us, our money, our decisions with money, and if you're a financial planner, how it affects your clients' decisions with money. And so in that, I think that's an important mentality to understand, and then going into those individual biases. Andy, I don't know if I got fully did your question, but hopefully that gives us a good start from that.
No, that's a fantastic start. Victor, what are your thoughts?
Well, I would say if talking about herd behavior, for example, I would also make a connection to that to something like groupthink. I tend to think of herd behavior as more of the crowd psychology that we see in bubbles. So, for example, it even takes people. Vernon Smith's research shows it takes about 3 cycles before people actually learn the lesson of not investing in a bubble, because they need to feel that pain a couple of times. Versus if you're thinking about an endowment board or a board of trustees, or a psychology of an investment team, that's to me more of a formal process of groupthink that is dominated by a leader in the group and that personality in which no one wants to descend from the group. So a way to come over, if you have a team, I think one of the ways of overcoming something like groupthink in a formal process is to always have somebody who's a contrarian in the group, also looking for contrary information. So if everybody's saying to invest in a stock, what is the reason to not to invest in a stock?
Bob, you work with a lot of individuals when it comes to leadership. So what insights can you share about groupthink, herd mentality, and trying to recognize what our biases are and making good decisions?
So I love where Mary and Victor went with this. So the first herd we ever belonged to was our family. And the family is where our biases, or what we call our limiting beliefs and our empowering beliefs, first get installed. So our attitudes about money start there. And that's also where our self-concept gets set up. And I believe as we dig into the conversation, we're going to have some fun understanding what it takes to actually make the changes so that people can begin to have a better, more productive relationship with money.
Mary, are there times where our biases help us and then others where we really have to be aware so that we can counteract these
Oh,
biases?
absolutely. And let me give you a very specific example here. Mental accounting. I think a lot of times we all use mental accounting. For example, if you said, hey, how much did you spend last month on your variable expenses? You would probably say, oh, well, I spent this, this, and this. But if we really went back and did it, you probably weren't spending that. That can be a negative side. On the flip side, mental accounting can also be really powerful. For example, if you were to have, let's say, some savings set up and say, I want to be saving for a trip, I want to be saving for the holidays, there are certain things that I want, an emergency account, whatever those things are, then you set them aside in buckets and you label them what you're actually spending. Or you could even do that within your spending plan and say, this is my grocery bucket or whatever that case may be. That also is mental accounting. And it's used in a very powerful way to help you save or spend in that certain area. So I think there's always that two sides to every coin on this, that yes, some of these biases can be harmful, but there's also some good things we can take away. And that's just one example.
Victor, when it comes to investing, what about, like, there are times when I think investors or an investor thinks he or she knows, and that can backfire. So how do we know when we actually know versus when we think we know and get ourselves into trouble?
Well, I guess for myself, because I'm classically trained in finance, I love the tools of standard finance, which are like modern portfolio theory, and the idea that people are not emotional. So I think understanding our biases, but then implementing a non-emotional strategy and making sure we're not trading and overly following our investments. And I think that's really a balance of, I think of two major groups: overconfident investors, which are people who trade too much, results in lower returns, tend to be men with a gender bias, in which there's research that shows because of overconfidence, women get higher investment returns over the long term. But that's also offset by the idea of status quo bias, in which investors are more like are like an ostrich effect. They bury their heads in the sand. So what we want to do is have a happy medium in which we are engaged with our investments, but we're not over managing them. But also we want to be receptive to financial advice at the same time. And I think each person is different. I think we find, many times, I think financial professionals especially, they want an all-in approach. Solve this problem in 5 minutes. Well, making, as human beings, is a messy situation at times. And I think if we accept that and we can guide people to make better decisions over the long term, explaining why we're making those decisions, not just the biases, but also integrating financial education and literacy as well, I think that makes a person a better financial decision maker over the long term.
Bob, you mentioned that the family is our first herd. When it comes to finances, people often reflect on what is your money story, like what is that early memory of money, and how did that influence, or how does that influence how you see money or interact with money today? Any insights on that and how we can make improvements?
Well, first of all, of the over 25 million businesses in the United States, you've got to figure that only 10% of them make over $1 million. And so let's go back to the family, which is a microeconomic unit, and look at the fact that families have mythology. They have stories about, who made all the money, who didn't make money, who was the good person, and what does money mean in terms of good, bad, right, or wrong. And working with the accountability. I loved your term, mental accounting, because it's always wrong. And the number of those entrepreneurs doing $1 million a year and less, they don't even look at their P&L every month. They don't understand accounting and how to get that accurate, those, not just the bins they want to save for that Mary's talking about, but they end up circling around because they don't really know what's real in their own business. And so one of the biggest things that's always bugged me is getting entrepreneurs into a P&L and having their accountants learn how to structure it. But that's a whole nother story.
Anyone have anything else to add?
Yeah, I would say too on that. I go back and I reflect on Bob's idea of this P&L. Most of us aren't wired knowing P&Ls. Just like several of us on this call probably love spreadsheets. We aren't naturally wired as human beings to love spreadsheets. So sometimes as advisors or experts in a certain field, we're very comfortable with a set of tools. We have to keep in mind, this is not everyone's bread and butter. That is not their favorite thing, to wake up in the middle of the night and put together a spreadsheet, although it may be ours. And so I think it's really important when we're talking with clients or anyone to understand where they're coming from first and really speaking in a language. So, we're kind of having fun with this idea of herding bias and ostriches with head in the sand and anchors and all these crazy talks. And most people out there are like, what in the world are you talking about, right? And so I think sometimes just breaking it down and making it very normal speak. And that's really important in the financial industry, that we don't use our financial jargon and our own lingo to make us feel smarter. It really needs to be pretty plain Jane. All a 401k is, or a 529 plan, it's a bucket where to put money that's tax incentivized. One is for retirement and the other is for education. And so when we start to simplify things in that way, it makes money more relatable to people. It doesn't put up that fear. And going kind of back to what Victor said with that inherent gender bias, a lot of times for females, it's feeling empowered, feeling like they do know something about it. And it may look different than how men know something about it, but that's okay, because we need to make that okay and not use our speak or lingo to put ourselves on a different platform than others.
I love that. Let's go to segment 2.